Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to welcome the attendees to what is really for me anyway, the most exciting event of the IIM calendar, which is the launch of the annual survey results and series of webinars around the survey. You'll see a poll there to that you can fill in as you come in. Hi, Stuart. Hi, Andrew. And without further ado, we'll kick off. So let me just move into the slide deck. So the panel today, we have Tony Evans. Tony is the chair of the IIM. You can see his bio there. We have Charles, also a director of the IIM and orchestra leader, Charles, of the survey with your colleagues in the background there, and myself, Bruce Rayner. I'll be facilitating today. I'm also a director of the IIM. Just a few housekeeping things. Questions, please, in the Q&A bar as we go. The webinar will be recorded and available to replay with the slide deck, I think, on the IIM website after the webinar. A little bit later, we'll give you the rundown on the forthcoming webinars in the series. Yeah, that should be it. Tony's having a couple of difficulties with his IT, so if he cuts out, he'll rejoin, but we'll hopefully be able to maintain the continuity as we go. So the agenda: 14th annual survey. Thanks to all that participated. As we move through the poll, I can see that roughly half of the attendees did participate and half didn't, and roughly half are members of the IIM and half aren't. So recruitment opportunity coming your way, guys. You're all executive interims, at least the ones that filled the poll in. We were hopefully being joined by some of the ISPs, but interim service providers, but let's see. So survey's been going for 14 years. We're going to go through the key themes and the insights, Q&A, and then, as I say, the upcoming events. So without further ado, I am going to say congratulations to New Street Consulting, who topped Eton Bridge off the #1 spot, which Eton Bridge, I know, were a bit disappointed because they wanted 3 in a row. But New Street had been in second place the previous year, so congratulations to New Street for regaining that #1 slot. And to Nick Shav, Tile Hill, who was voted the #1 ISP consultant. And I think from memory, Charles, was that Denise Raw last year?
It was, yeah.
And Denise is actually going to be joining us tomorrow on the webinar. So no doubt she'll be reflecting her disappointment. Right. And if I stop mucking about with the slides, I'm going to hand over to Tony Evans, who's going to take you through this next part of the presentation. Tony.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Bruce. Good afternoon, everyone. If for some obscure reason my technology fails and I get thrown off again, I apologise in advance, and I'm sure Charles can pick up the thread while I manage to find my way back in. So we've done an initial look at the overall report, which extends to some large number of pages, I think in excess of 75, to be launched in the not too distant future. So we started off with the age and service profiles for the respondents. A couple of thousand people have responded this year. Very healthy turnout for the survey, which is great. And it makes the results very representative of the profession as a whole in the UK. What's interesting with this first slide is the slight reduction in the average age of an interim. What that's indicating, I think, and we'll see a little bit further when we go through other slides, that we are getting a sort of double effect of an increased number of younger people entering the profession, and typically at the older end, we're seeing, certainly through the way the Institute monitors its arrivers and leavers, on the leavers end, we lose people for two reasons generally. One is retirement, and the other one is where people go back into the world of permanent employment. Both effects cover pretty much 90% plus of all reasons for leaving, and that's having the effect of shifting the age profile a little to the left as you look at the chart. So if we just flick on, Bruce, to the service profile, the next one, it's reflected here, and we're seeing a fairly healthy pipeline of new talent coming in, which obviously implies less experience as an interim, and I'm quite happy that that's happening. And one of the impacts may well be the demand for the type of skill set, at least at a technical level, that an interim requires. We've certainly seen for the last couple of years, I would say at least now, where there's a big demand for things like digital-based skills and so forth, which tends to be seen, I think, as perhaps a slightly younger person's area of expertise. So this trend may continue a little further yet. Okay, so if we trundle on, we've also spent some time this year looking at the male-female balance of things within the survey respondents. The chart you can see in front of you shows that we don't have a straight line path of increase in the number of women in the profession as per survey, but we have now got over the 14 years from about 20% to now 30% of the respondents being female. We suspect that that trend will continue to grow with time, not least because if you go and look at the statistics for women in fairly senior positions in quoted companies and large businesses, that figure now is at around the 40% mark. So we tend to lag what's going on in the corporate world, because people generally need to earn their spurs corporately before they will come into the interim profession as a career change. So let's move on a little bit more. So having said, okay, around 30% of the respondents this year are female, we've looked at the 5 leading functional disciplines and split them between male and female to see whether or not there are any differences. And as you can see from this chart, we're seeing a significant bias in the accounting and finance field to males, and a bias the other direction for HR. Interestingly, of these 5 top ones, then slightly below where we might expect from the respondents at board and general management level, but program and project management and business change and transformation, both pretty much spot on the average. So quite interesting now to be able to start to break down and look at the impact by function of the male-female split. Okay, so let's move on. Right, this one is a little bit more involved, the 2 charts. So if we look at, for example, the chart on the right, what we have done here is take all the female respondents and then split them out to see what the top 5 functional disciplines are for the female respondents, and the same approach on the left for the male respondents. Quite interesting to see the differences here and the similarities. So both show a preponderance towards business change and transformation. Maybe overall not too surprising that it's one of the biggest things, because for a few years now the overall survey has shown that 90% of all assignments being taken account of in the year of the survey are involved with significant change of some description. Interestingly, then we get the accounting function popping up for the men and the HR for the women, so a distinction there. Both then are showing program and project management as key, but then below that on the male side we get the board and general management popping up at number 4, and we get operations on the female side, which is also interesting, and IT and related functions on the male side arrives, not on the female. There's quite a long list of other functional activities which the survey has grouped together. Okay, thank you. Right, so this slide now shows a shift in the balance of ages, which I think reflects some of the things we were showing earlier, where we were identifying more women coming in gradually into the profession. And we can see here that there are a greater proportion of, across the spectrum, younger females than there are males, which is indicating that we might continue to, it's reinforcing this idea, we might continue to see a shifting in the balance male to female as time goes on. And I think that in the report proper, there are a number of factors which indicate that that trend is starting to gain a little more strength. Okay. So we then have here an opportunity to look at the type of end client. So this is on the left-hand side, showing really that 75% of all the assignments in the year are really involved in either private equity as client base or large companies, perhaps not unexpected. The rest of it is smaller businesses. So 25% of the market is involved with smaller organizations, not small, but enough to be able to make a distinction where the bulk of it's going. And on the right-hand side, we get an interesting split here. There are significant differences. So the significant majority, as it were, or place where women are finding assignments in this last year are at sort of division of a large business, and that's significantly more than the next one, which is interestingly then where we see women in small businesses. And at the other end of the spectrum, private equity and family-owned businesses are not using women as much as one might expect from the overall number of respondents that we've got in the survey. Difficult to say why that might be. What we've not got here is being able to split it down any further by function as a cross-reference to the different end client type, but that might be possible going forward to start being able to do a lot more analysis now. Okay. Ethnicity. over a number of years now, we've seen the interim profession move from what has been predominantly a white male environment in the UK, and it's gradually taken shape to reflect much more the UK population. So this year we thought it was worth showing that similarity, in fact. And if anything, we can see that different ethnic groupings away from being white are figuring very well within the context of the respondents and the profession as a whole, which is encouraging to see that we've got this pretty well balanced ethnic mix. A couple of percent of people in the survey chose not to say what their ethnicity was. We give people that option. The figures for the UK population come from official figures for 2023. So these are as up to date as you can get them. So we've pretty much got a good split through ethnicity here, which is, I think, good to see, and I think is a mark of the maturity, if you like, of the understanding and the nature and attractiveness of the profession as a whole. Thanks, Bruce. Now, this one, we're trying to get rather a lot of information for the sake of completeness onto the slides. So for those of you who've got a relatively small screen like I have, I apologise for the smallness of the text. But basically, there are a couple of things that stand out here, 2 or 3 things that I'd like to draw your attention to. One is that in terms of where interims live, the vast majority in regional terms live in London and the southeast. That's been a trend for a lot of years. That's clearly not changing anytime soon. The other thing that it's worth looking at here is that 3.5% of respondents, when you start looking at some of the smaller ones, if you add them up, live outside the UK. And the other thing there that's interesting is if you come across to the where's the work, then nearly 11% of the respondents are actually working outside the UK. So there's a reasonable minority proportion of the total interim population that is working on an international basis, which is interesting to see. And it's been pretty consistent for a number of years now. The other thing that's occurred over the last 2 to 3 years is in the work side, the big black bar at the top of the chart, which is where people are able to work from home. Now that, for those of you who can't see the number on the top right, which is anybody who's not in finance, because in finance it's compulsory to be able to read figures on a spreadsheet at 3 point or less. The working from home percentage for this last year has been 49% of the respondents. Now that's actually down 10% on the previous year. So although there's a relaxation of the number of people who are in working from home mode, the proportion is still very high. And if we go back to 2019, we need to keep in mind that line didn't exist. So it reflects what's being seen, and people have heard about this enormous upheaval as a result of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown scenarios, which we've all been through, and how people are being able to get their work done now. And that's being recognised in the way that people can do interim work, which is good from a flexibility of activity point of view. It definitely looks like this is here to stay. Whether it remains so high is another matter, but it's there for all to see. Okay, thanks, Bruce. Moving on a bit further to what the respondents think about the market looking forward. the right-hand chart is a reflection of people's confidence in the market, and year on year we're seeing a significant shift away from almost unbridled enthusiasm last year to the way the market was going after the being let free a bit from lockdown. This year we're being tempered far more. We've had the arrival of inflation again, and the impact that and other macroeconomic factors are having on the overall UK economy's performance, and people are just becoming much more concerned, if you like, about the way that that things are going to be coming a bit tougher to find the next assignment. And having said that, then the left-hand side chart is saying, but interims are still very optimistic, pretty much the same as last year, that they're going to be able to either keep the same kind of income and day rate, or even better. Now, that might be a response to the fact that we have significant inflation and people are seeing that as an opportunity to increase their fees. But nonetheless, we've got harder to get an assignment potentially on one hand, but having got one, I'm going to get well paid for the work on the other. So just starting to see a shift compared to last year with all of this. Okay. Thanks, Bruce. We move on a bit now from our view of the market to IR35, which arguably has an impact on all of that. If we look at the right-hand chart again, we can see that last year there was a big concern as to whether or not the SDSs being issued, the status determination statements, whether or not they were going to start becoming just issued and everybody gets to be inside because that's the safe place from the client's point of view. And I put safe in inverted commas. Interestingly, this year, 6 out of 10 of all the assignments being considered within the survey are still outside IR35. And there's no evidence yet that is changing greatly. On the left-hand chart, we're seeing that the number of SDSs being received, which was a question last year, it was a concern, not so many were being received. We've now got 80% of the respondents saying they have received an SDS, and that's better than it was. Still some way to go, bearing in mind there is a requirement to produce these things. It's rather difficult if you're going to be asked to do an assignment if you don't get to understand the rationale for why it has been identified as inside or outside to come to that. And certainly in terms of thinking ahead and maintaining your own records, a diary, if you like, of the whole process of engaging on an assignment these days, you need to be very well documented so that your not only is your contract reflective of what the status determination statement says, it's also reflective of how you do your work, and it's also the starting point really for how you monitor and maintain records of what you're doing and how you're doing it in the event that you get an inquiry from HMRC. So these documents are important to have, but they're not the be all and end all. You really do need to be making sure you keep notes on what you're doing, how you're doing it, so that it remains and you can be seen to be consistent with the starting point for the work. Thanks, Bruce. So moving on to the hot topic of remuneration. Interestingly, the day rate remains the overridingly dominant method of payment. We looked in the survey at variations on payment themes, and they're all still really quite small. So it's still very important to keep your day rate clear and upfront and centre when looking at work. And the other thing that it's important to do for you as an individual will be to look at the way you, if you're looking at taking on an inside IR35 assignment, how your day rate will relate to your salary payment via an umbrella or via the payroll of your client, or however it's done, so that you're not losing out, because one of the difficulties will be the way that the system can be bent so that you end up effectively paying the employer's NI contribution through the losses and deductions from your pay if you're not careful. Okay, so that's what I want to say about that one, Bruce, I think. This slide shows the last 14 years tracking the average day rate as reported through the survey. As you can see, it's gone up slightly to £811 a day, but this hides quite a wide range of different categories of individual within this. So if we look at the IR35 impact, which I was just describing now, for those with outside, the actual average day rate is 853. Inside, it's 740. Now, that's a very significant reduction, and is the challenge, if you like, for people accepting inside IR35 work. Are they actually losing out simply because they're having to pay more tax than they really should be doing under the this is fair tax regime from HMRC, which isn't necessarily working out that way. And that 13% reduction is an average. If you look at, and you'll see in the report when it's issued in a few days' time, the variation across everybody who is inside IR35 is very significant. There's quite a large minority group of people where they're showing figures of 25% or worse in terms of lower income than they would have got through the simple day rate. So it's very variable. In terms of sector, we can see here that each sector has gone up, but if we do the crude split of private, public and third sector, you can see there's a very large difference in day rate. And the private sector day rate at 910 is looking quite healthy compared to the average at 811. And then the final point here is that the gender gap, the simplistic gap, is simply looking at male day rates and, or remuneration and female, and you can see there's a 17% difference. Doesn't look very good at first sight, but what this doesn't do is tell you the role splits, and so somebody who's acting as an interim CEO might be getting quite considerably bigger day rate than somebody who's working as for example, an interim project manager. And the other issue which happens and is clear from history is that people working in smaller businesses tend to get lower day rates, and those people working away from either international or let's call it Greater London area, there's also a geographic impact as well on day rates potentially.
Tony,
So,
can I just come in? Tony, can I just
sure.
come in and ask you just a question here that strikes me looking at the chart? So there was clearly from 2009 to, I guess, 2017, we were bobbing around the kind of low to mid 600s. And then there was this point of inflection from 17, 18, where we go from 674 to 740.
Yes.
Which was quite a spectacular jump compared with the trends either side of that jump. What do you think drove that moment? Well, what looks like a moment of inflection there? Was that financial crash? What was that?
It's
20,
too
what happened
late
in
for
2018?
financial crash.
Yeah, exactly. That was
Yeah.
2008, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, the impact, if you looked at other slides as well, the impact in the interim market from the financial crash in 8-9 occurred in 10. So you can see there's a drop from 627 to 602 in 210. That's similar to other drops that we've seen on trend graphs. If you look at the period 17-18, it's difficult to say that these things are correlate. That is, there's an interaction, but coincident at least with that period is when we saw the introduction of IR35 in the public sector.
Right. Yeah.
And it was that 17-18 period. So bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that the public sector applied this almost blanket inside, there was a big push to everybody being inside. That could have account for at least some of the drop, if you like, going into at 17. And then as everything started to unravel in the sense of people started to become more sensible, then in 18 and 19 that rose. So there was bounce there, if you like. What else was going on, particularly? I mean, you've got to look at the private sector. I don't know, but it might be that there was a greater proportion of private sector activity. There are so many variables in this, Bruce. It's very, very difficult. Yeah. But it's a very good point on the chart. It's the biggest inflection point on the chart in over 3 surveys.
And if I could be permitted a follow-up, Tony. So your question, the point on the gender split.
Yeah.
So is there any data on the like for like? So if you take a CEO role or an HR role or anything like for like, is that male female split? Is there evidence of gender bias in day rates on a like for like basis?
That's a very good question. As you may well know, Bruce, I'm not allowed anywhere near the guts of all of this on the basis that if I press a button, I'm likely to destroy all the information. So I'd have to sort of take a step back. So I personally don't know. I would have thought that we may be in a position now to be able to do more detailed analysis over a period with this information, because we can slice and dice with more detail now. And Charles may be in a position to answer that more fully than I can, but I suspect we don't have the data just now.
Yeah, because what would be interesting is that, if there were 2 assignments or 1 assignment through any of the ISPs, let's say, is there a bias where if a male candidate is selected, he earns more than a female candidate selected for the same gig, or vice versa? And probably the data is too small. I don't know.
Charles, I'm sure can answer, but just the point I would make is there are other significant factors that you have to take into account, not just the role. So what sector it's in, what industry it's in, what part of the country it's in, all of these factors can be very significant to take into account as well. It's not a straightforward question. You're going to end up with things like multiple regression and what have you to try and make sense of it, I suspect.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything, Charles?
No, I think you covered it well there, Tony. There's a question in, Bruce, I see, from Naresh.
Yeah. Is that covered, or have we skipped past that? How many are earning? How many are earning, or what percentage are earning more than 1,500 a day?
Okay.
And
So,
what's the high and low?
yeah, so I can tell you the over 1,500 based on the samples about on the survey is about 3%. Across all sectors, all genders, all everything. The second question, what is it?
The high and low that's driving the average.
Oh, that's a more challenging one, and that's over 2 years you're asking, Naresh, which we don't have that data to hand for both years.
Well, we do say on the preamble in the survey, don't we, that we regard interims, proper interims, in proper inverted commas interims, they're looking at 500 a day and north thereof.
Yeah, and that's and the only exception to that's in the public sector with the sort of NHS space in particular.
Yes, it's not hard and fast rule.
But just to
Okay.
sorry, go on. You carry on.
No, you were going to say, making the point.
No, I was just sorry, just trying to do a quick count if I can. Just in a similar way to the so at the low end, sort of 500, and those small relatively small numbers that drop below where we've got, as I said, the sort of NHS, you're talking about 7%, something like that.
Right.
This year. Okay.
I was looking if you had a slide that had the distribution of the, the day rates.
It's not in here. It is in the final report.
Yes, we've tried to. I mean, if we tried to show everything in the report, we'd be here at midnight. So
yeah. So Naresh, you'll be able to get that when you get the full report. So hopefully you'll see.
And if there's information which isn't in the full report, which people would be interested to know about, then tell us.
Yeah.
I think that would be of interest. And perhaps the other thing I could put a plug in here, anybody who's quite good at analysis, perhaps with a slight stats leaning, but not compulsory, if they wanted to, particularly as members, if they wanted to do a spot of volunteering to invest some time to start looking at slicing and dicing information further down, that would also be interesting to know about.
Yeah, I mean, probably time for a little bit of a commercial break on that, Tony, because again, interesting from the poll that we put up, half of the people on the call today are members and half aren't. Mm-hmm. And we should say that all of this work is done by volunteers. These are people from the interim community that are volunteering their time and their skills to put this stuff together. So it's all done pro bono. Nobody's getting paid. And the only thing that keeps the Institute going are the subscriptions of the members. So again, if you haven't joined yet, and you feel compelled to, then all of that information is on the website. And I think, Charles, also, am I right in saying that the application fee, which is normally 40 quid, is waived for people that are on these webinars? Yeah. So now's the time for the newbies to go and get signed up, and all the benefits of membership are there. Not least all the data that is included in the survey. I note that 70% of today's attendees are not on assignment. So if you are looking for your next assignment, then the resources on the IIM website are a very, very good place to be in order to get plugged in to who potentially can help you source that next assignment. So so there we are. Right, moving on then, Tony.
Yes, please. Right, okay. So having looked at the day rate, how often can we apply that? So the billable days, the right hand chart is showing us that, well, a couple of things really. Firstly, that people billing from 121 upwards in terms of the number of days in the year that they were doing work and could bill is fairly consistent compared to the previous year. And then also encouragingly, the number of interims who are responding and saying they've done no work in the year has fallen from 5 to 3%. And I would say that is in fact a 3-year consecutive fall. If you go back to 21, then that figure was 7.5%. So it's coming down nicely, and obviously we'd like to see that at 0 if at all possible. The left-hand chart shows over the survey trend line that we're back up now to 156 days billed in the year. If we ignore 2010, which is the dip I referred to earlier after the financial crash, and then the 2020-21 dip, which is, as we all know, COVID and pandemics and lockdowns, then we tend to sit somewhere between 150 and 160 billable days through most of this period, which seems to be an industry norm that's being established pretty much, notwithstanding major wobblies in the marketplace. And we seem to be back at that kind of level now. I haven't a clue why it's 150 to 160. It just is. Because if we go, I think it's the next slide. This is quite interesting as well, because I really find this slide quite interesting, because if we look, this is how long are people not working between assignments. So what it's saying is 53% last year of everybody had less than 1 month gap between assignments. I find that very impressive and encouraging. So if we look, the whole gap of 3 months or less is effectively 4/5 of all the respondents are securing their next assignment within 3 months. And that's a fairly good turnaround, bearing in mind you've got to come off one, you've got to decide where you're going to go out and look again, having had a week's breather or whatever it might be. Then you've got to go and find some people who are interested in your skill set and taking you on and go through their process, whatever that might be, and start. So that's encouraging. And at the so overall, the average is showing a downward trend of from 3 months. The average was last year 3 months. It's now 2.7, which I think is consistent with seeing fewer people out of work in the 12 months. So anything greater than 6 months will reflect that. So this is quite handy. And if this continues, the year we're in now, it'll be a very impressive rate and encouraging. I think that people are finding it commercially easier to move from one assignment to another. Before we go into the Q&A, I might just add something to that slide, because behind this, there's also quite a bit of information in the report about the interaction with ISPs. And what the information we're getting back is saying is that generally people are building closer relationships with fewer ISPs as a trend. So typically we're seeing solid relationships with 10 or fewer ISPs, which, if I go back a few years, people would much more scattergun the approach. And the other thing that the information is showing us is that having that relationship, an existing relationship with one or more consultants in an ISP, is the crucial thing in the way that you may get work from any particular ISP. So it's from the information we've got, it's 5 times more likely that you'll be contacted by an ISP consultant rather than you contacting them on the off chance. So just ringing people up saying, have you got anything? Not the way to go. The way to go is to have that built relationship. You're 5 times more likely to have the constructive interaction about work. And the other thing is that you're 15 times more likely to be contacted where you are a known entity than if you've just got your CV on the database. So what that's saying maybe isn't a big shock in directional terms, but in multiple terms, to me, I thought that was very significant. And that indicates to you the kind of return on investment you get from making the time to build relationships with relatively few good ISPs and their consultants that are relevant to your neck of the woods. So I just wanted to add that at the end, Bruce.
Thanks, Tony. I just came off mute there. I mean, that is fascinating and great food for thought. I mean, especially around that end part on the ISPs. A lot to take in there, and so we'll invite questions from the floor, please, or questions stroke reflections, whether or not this fits in with people's own experience, or be interested to hear that. So in the Q&A, please, let's have questions. And while we're doing that, let's just Tony or Charles, if one of you wants to run through a little bit about the IIM. I've got a question on ISPs which I'll save, but if we can just run through this would be helpful, especially for those that are considering joining that are on this call.
Sure. Okay, shall I quickly whiz through, Charles?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've been around since 2001, and as Bruce mentioned earlier, we all operate on a voluntary basis. And so the more the merrier in terms of people volunteering. We're always very happy to hear from a willing volunteer, and we can find lots of very helpful and useful things that you can get involved with. It'll both help the institute, it will help the profession, and it will help you personally in terms of improving your profile more generally. One of the things that we do is when you apply for membership and you go through what is a pretty straightforward process for us identifying whether or not you'd be an associate or a full member. We also, having gone through that, and in accepting joining the institute, you take on a code of conduct. We're quite serious about our code of conduct because it requires you to operate at a standard, an ethical and level of integrity, which our clients would at least expect. We want our members to hold the highest levels of integrity. And frankly, if you start at any time to have that questioned, the impact on your personal brand and your ability to secure work plummets. So being able to say in front of any client that you are independently accredited, you follow this code of conduct, which is significant, and you're very comfortable following it, is something that's we think is very important. If you're in front of a client, potential client through an ISP, in some respects, they are doing that bit for you, because one of the reasons why a client will go to an ISP is because they want them to filter to trusted people. If you're talking to clients directly, so there's no third party involved, then one of the key reasons people will buy from you is because they know you and they trust you. So you have to be able to demonstrate that level of trust and come across in the right way. We work with affiliates and partner organizations, and they all contribute towards the betterment of the profession, and the interim professionals in the Institute in particular. So these things here are really on the left. These are the things that we provide. We put webinars here, but we also are aiming, as we get setting things up now, webinars for the autumn season to get back into physical events. We've got one coming up, which I won't tell you too much about, but it's going to be involved in looking at the impact of macroeconomic position on the market as a whole, which I think will be very instructive. So we'll get back into physical events as well, which I'm personally very keen to do. And on the right, we see various things that the Institute and its members can help with, either directly or through the third parties that we have relationships with. And one of the things that we do have is tax investigation insurance, which also holds a legal helpline, and that's provided directly to you as part of your membership, your annual membership fee. Okay, so this is really a summary of the things that we do, and the two important pieces of information here. The annual membership is currently only £160 a year for being a full member, and you get all the stuff that was on the previous slide. If you want to know any more, there are the phone numbers, and you can drop an email to member services at iim.org.uk, and they'd be delighted to help you with any questions, and if you need anything to navigate the website, which we think is reasonably clear and straightforward, but that's us and we built it, so we're biased. You might find it helpful to talk to somebody about it on the way through. I think that's about all at this point for the promo.
Just sorry, so just go back one. Just to call out the application fees waiver. So if you do apply and you use the code survey23 before July the 15th, then you'll save yourself the £40 application fee, which is, worth having. So
yeah,
okay.
I can feel the rush to the the website as you announced that, Charles. And then just the last one here, or the next one, is the series of webinars around the survey. So we have one, as we said, tomorrow, which is already pretty healthily subscribed, but do go and book yourself a place. What's driving demand for interims? And there's a panel of leading ISPs. Denise is there, Denise Raw from New Street, who were the #1 provider. Jack Lane from Finital, who they are exclusively plugged into the private equity market. And Charles, who was the third? My memory escaped me on the third panelist. Can you remember?
Yeah, Ross Dawson from Eton Bridge.
Oh, Ross Dawson, yeah, Eton Bridge. Well, of course, Ross. So from Eton Bridge, who are now in second place, but Eton Bridge, of course, are close to my own heart because they've placed me on my 2 previous assignments. So I was glad to see them in the top 3 again this year. So Eton Bridge, New Street, and Finital I'll be hosting tomorrow, so come and book your place. The 28th, what makes a successful interim? So this is for interims by interims. So it's going to be an interactive session of practitioners in a sort of workshop setting, kicking around the ideas of what what the secret sauce is. So that's a kind of new format for us, and I'll be interested to see how that one goes. Again, pretty well subscribed at the moment, but go and book your place. And Wednesday, July the 5th, women in the interim market, mixed panel of ISPs and interims, sharing their thoughts on some of those issues that Tony raised about the representation of women in the profession. So again, open to all, and do tell your friends and get your place booked on those.
Bruce, can I just say on that one, this is not meant to be a women exclusive event. And I think having, particularly if we've got male interims, I think they can give an insight to that discussion, viewing things from the side as well. I think it would be very additive to the overall discussion. So I'd encourage everybody to think about being able to attend that one. Yeah,
indeed. So the question I had, as we roll up to the last 3 or 4 minutes, Tony, was just in how the ISP market, I mean, you touched on it yourself, but how the ISP market is shaping up. And I saw results from the previous surveys that said that about 50% of the membership or survey respondents, and certainly represented in the membership, are getting their assignments through their own network rather than through ISPs. So is that continuing? It would be the first question. Has that trend continued or changed?
Right. There is a small minority of interims that exclusively get their assignments directly themselves. They don't ever use ISPs. The vast majority, so like 90%, use ISPs in some way, shape or form. And we have maybe at one end 20% of interims that typically only use ISPs. They don't go out and actively get their own gigs. And then there's this very large proportion of people in the middle who, and it's unsurprising when you think about it, use both. And the point I was making earlier about the way that the interim appears to be using the ISP now is becoming far more focused. And I think that seems to be a trend line. But the way that the assignments have been found over the year, this last year for the survey, there is a significant overlap between people who've gone out and said, yeah, I've got that directly, and people who've gone out and said, yeah, I've got it through an ISP. So I just think the essence is that what we've been talking about for a number of years now, where we've been trying to get interims to recognize that it's the quality of the relationship, not the volume of contacts, that's the important thing, seems to be winning the day. And I think that benefits everybody. It's much better. It's much better to have, if you've got 8 to 10 people out there who keep your name top of mind when they're looking at assignments that they're getting from clients, that's got to be better than, let's say, 25 consultants who may or may not recall the fact that they've got your CV, if I take it in extremis.
Thanks, Tony.
Does that answer the question, Bruce?
Yes, it does. I mean, I've got a supplementary which I'm going to save for another day, which is about how the ISP offering has changed, and some of them. I mean, people like Wilton Bain, Odgers, and another one that comes to mind, Sullivan and Stanley, which was founded by a guy who was previously with LaFosse, have moved into this consultancy offering where they're putting teams in behind consultancy type contracts, possibly in response to IR35. Not sure. And I'll be interested maybe on the Wednesday, the June 28th one, to explore how many people are going in on the back of those sort of introductions versus the kind of, the more traditional, I'm looking for a CEO or an interim HR director or one of those things, where those consultancies seem to be promoting the idea of transformation as an antidote to the big four traditional consultancy model. But again, maybe that's one for another day, Tony, unless you've got a quick 10 seconds on that one.
No, I don't, but I recognise that it exists, and it might also be an interesting pointer for tomorrow.
Yeah. All right. So on that note, we're just at 1300 hours. I'd like to especially thank Tony for leading us through what was a fascinating insight there, snapshot on a much bigger 70-page report. When will that drop, guys? Friday. Okay, we'll look out for that. And also special thanks to Charles and the team behind Charles for putting all the data together. There is a huge amount of work that goes into this, both in the survey preparation and the preparation of the results. So a big shout out to Charles and the team for doing that. And last but by no means least, to the attendees who've joined us today. Hope you enjoyed it. The non-members considering membership, I hope you jump on and fill your applications in now and save your 40 quid. And we look forward to seeing you on one or all of these upcoming webinars, Wednesdays, 12 o'clock, 21st, 28th and 5th of June. So sorry, 5th of July. So on that note, I will close and wish you all a great rest of the day. Thanks very much, everyone.